Ryan Glover. I wanted to do this video. Boosie recently posted on Instagram and he was wondering why black men date white women. And I feel like it's 2025. Like, why is color a relevant issue as far as dating goes? And I married a black woman, but before I got married, like, I had dated women of all races. And one thing I can notice is that women are pretty much all the same. Is not like, that you could treat them the same, but they're very similar as far as we all want water, we all want food, we all want a place to live. People need a car, get around. So, I mean, I think that race is really like an irrelevant factor in 2025. And I think it's very small-minded. I think it shouldn't matter what race a person is. I think that you should be focusing on if a person loves you, if a person respects you, if a person's loyal, if a person's honest. There's so many other qualities that I would consider besides race. And I would say that race can play a factor, because there were times in a relationship where I noticed that maybe that they had relatives that were racist, and that could be something that you don't want to be a part of. You don't want to get into a relationship with someone of another race and that family isn't accepting you. But you could marry a black person and their family doesn't really like you or accept you, because there's people who are colorists in the African American community. I think that's a huge problem that we have. And I think it's so stupid that people just can't accept people and love people for who they are. And I think that was what Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about in his I Have a Dream speech about, looking at the content of a person's character. I think that is so important, getting beyond the physical beauty, because I think there's beauty in all races. All women are beautiful. Black women, white women, Asian women, Hispanic women, Middle Eastern women. There's so many beautiful women across the globe. And it really pains me to go on social media. I feel like there's so many people that have so many negative mindsets or negative things to say, particularly when it comes to black women. And I find black women very desirable. I think a lot of times that people can say they have a bad attitude, but that's not true. I think black women have to deal with a lot. They have to deal with a lot more than other races, just like black men do. And it's important that we are there to support each other. One of the things that I've noticed is that I'm tired of people idealizing a white man is the best type of man for you. And I think that's ridiculous. I think there's some great white men, of course, historically, and no one can deny that. But this idea that of white supremacy is being perpetuated to a point where girls idealize someone who's white. And it's not because of their accomplishments. It's not because of what kind of person they are. It's not because of anything tangible. It's just because of the fact that they're white and they've been brainwashed to believe that this is the American dream. And also white men don't face the barriers that black men do in society. And it's just a reality. It's a lot harder for black men to be successful in this world because I deal with racism on a daily basis. And I don't think people understand how deep racism runs and how strong you have to be. And white people don't have to deal with that at all. I feel that it's really interesting, the fact that people kind of put down black men all the time, or make it seem that black men aren't great, but we deal with a lot. And I think it's just unfortunate that race is such a huge factor in society today. And I see it all the time when I go on Instagram. I could post anything And here comes the racist trolls saying like, you basketball playing Jamal, or, these are like actual comments that I see on social media on a daily basis. So I would encourage people, I hope like they do better and look at people beyond like, their race. I think like, it's very important to look at people for who they are on the inside spiritually. And, it's important, like, what you guys can accomplish together. And, obviously, like, all relationships are hard. I think regardless, if you marry a black person, if you marry a white person, you marry an Asian person, you're going to have some obstacles. I think like, that no relationship is going to be easy or going to come without some hurdles. And I think like, that sometimes that people do marry like, the other race because they feel like it'll be easier. And I don't know if that's necessarily the truth. Maybe I love to interview some people who are in interracial relationships and get their perspective on it. But I see like, that there could possibly be, some issues. I think like, the Colin Kaepernick documentary kind of explored some of those ideas, like watching it, some of the obstacles he faced being someone who was interracial and experiencing racism as a person who was half black and half white, but he looked as like a black person. Even though he was lighter skinned, you still experience racism sometimes. And you can experience racism as someone who's as dark as me. And I think like, that it's just like, important for like, colorism to stop in our community as well. Because I feel like, that a lot of people try to take away the black identity of people who are lighter skinned, or take away even like, the identity of blackness of people who have different political views. I see that all the time. Like, when people are conservative, someone like Candace Owens, who's obviously grew up black and, obviously has thoughts that aren't the norm amongst African Americans to some extent, even though like, I would say that the black community tends to be a little bit more traditionalist. So is that even like, a real reason? Like, why do we reject conservatives so much? Or people who aren't voting Democratic, like, we seem to be able to criticize people who think different or act different. I don't think it matters. Like, I think people just should be them and individual. And I think it's really great. Like, some of the best people in the black community are people who chose to be the unique selves and weren't anyone else. Like, we could talk about Pharrell, we could talk about Aaron McGruder, we could talk about, these are individuals. They didn't try to be anybody else. They just tried to be themselves. And I think that's wonderful. I think like, it just shows like, that race isn't really all that important. I think the most important thing is that you are true to yourselves. You're a good person. You're not harming anyone. I think like, that's a lot more important than someone's race. And like, I've met wonderful people of all races throughout my life. But I will say, I mean, I'm concerned about like, as far as like the racism, I think that, there's a number of times where I've approached women and they didn't give me a chance because of my race. I think that's unfortunate. They missed out on an incredible person. And I think that race isn't that important, as I've said. And really, people need to get over that. It's 2025. I think like, let's get on a higher mindset where we're actually judging people on who they are. And not on just like, what they have. I think that's like, small-minded as well. I think like a lot of times like, people favor like, the idea of like financial wealth or like, money or assets, but really what really matters is the heart. And like, I would like to see like, people like, putting that as a priority, I think like, that your heart matters. And it seems like, the people don't take that into consideration. You just take it into skin color. And it's unfortunate.